So good morning, everybody. Thank you again for joining us this morning for day 2 of our volunteer festival. And this is our first session today. What is a carbon footprint? So hopefully you are all here to find out the answer to that question. So let's make a start. So there's a bit of an elephant in the room when it comes to this question. And indeed, there is an elephant on my slide, as you can see. Its name is climate change. Climate change is really underpins carbon footprints and is really the reason why we all start to want to ask questions about carbon footprints and why carbon footprinting has become a sort of a hot topic, really. Climate change is behind all of that. I just wanted to share with you a little bit about why I care about climate change and about carbon footprints. I'm not here to tell you why you should care, because it's something that is going to be very personal to you, even if you choose to engage. But for me, it's about trying to fix it, doing something to protect the future for myself and those around me. For me, that includes my young son. But this really is about what matters to you as well, and that could be a person. People, could be a place that you love, or it could be a thing that you cherish. And what that means to you is going to be very personal to you and will be your own motivator for what and why you choose to take any action. I think also for me, it's important to note that it can be challenging to not get what's termed eco-anxiety, so get so concerned about something that you're almost paralyzed into inaction. That is not the purpose of this session. The purpose of this session, I'll be sharing positive stories, and I'll be talking about climate change in a positive way to hopefully inspire people into action. If you are motivated by more negative stories, or you maybe need some of that to spur you into action, that's great. And there is plenty of that out there in the wider world for you to find, but that is not going to be the focus of this session. I think to talk about climate change, I choose to do that in a positive way. So to start with, I've got our first activity for us. So I'm just going to ask if anybody can tell me if they know what this image shows here. Has anybody seen this before? Is anybody familiar with it? So this is what's known as the climate stripes. So climate change refers to the long-term shifts in global or regional climate patterns caused by human activities, leading to rising temperatures, extreme weather events, and biodiversity loss. We'll talk a little bit more about biodiversity later on. However, weather refers to short-term atmospheric conditions experienced locally, such as temperature, precipitation, and wind. And those of you joining us from the UK will be very familiar with how much we in the UK love to talk about the weather. Talk about climate change is probably not something we're so comfortable with or familiar with. So these stripes illustrate the change in global temperature since records began. Now, these records began in 1850, which those of you who are history will recall correlates with the start of the Industrial Revolution. So we can really see what this is showing us is clearly the impact of human activity. This is not what would have happened naturally. This is as a direct result of human activity as a result of the start of the Industrial Revolution. Blue, the darker the blue, the colder the average temperature. The darker the red, the hotter the average temperature, going from a sliding scale. And you can quite clearly see on the far right-hand side, the more hotter temperatures have occurred most recently, demonstrating a real shift in the global temperatures. So this is then our first activity, which I would like your help with, please. So this is the global pattern. So this shows us as an average temperature across the entire globe, what things have looked like. I now have 5 country-specific stripe patterns to show you, and I would like you to share with me which countries you think these represent. Now, I'll give you a clue, because there's obviously quite a lot of countries in the world to choose from. These 5 countries represent the 5 countries where shared interest has colleagues working. So those are the UK, Ghana, Kenya, Costa Rica, and Peru. So each of those countries is represented by one of these bands. What I'm looking for from you, if you're able to, please, is to let me know which band you think allocates to which country. So let's start off with this second band here. Who thinks they can guess which country that one correlates to? So the countries we're looking for are the UK, Costa Rica, Peru, Ghana, or Kenya. That first band, who thinks they know what that first band might be? Feel free to just unmute yourself and give me the country if you think you want to have a go.
Sally, I'm going to say, because of how cold it is at the beginning, I'm going to say UK.
Okay. Any advance on UK for that one?
Costa Rica.
Costa Rica. Okay.
I think maybe Peru.
Peru. Okay. I haven't yet had the right answer, if that helps any of you.
Okay.
This one is Kenya.
All right.
This one is
Really?
Kenya. So this shows us the pattern of global temperatures, of the yearly average of global temperatures for Kenya.
It shows how cold it was. That's really incredible, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Absolutely.
Depends where they monitor it, I suppose. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, true. Very true.
It's like the snow on top of Mount
Kilimanjaro.
Kilimanjaro. Yeah. So, but I think that's sort of melting a bit now. But I was that was quite amazing, because it's sort of more or less on the equator, and yet there was snow on top of the mountain. So altitude is a big
Absolutely.
factor.
All these things make a difference, don't they? So so the first one is globe, then the second layer there is Kenya. What about the third one? Any guesses on the third one?
Ghana.
Well done. Yeah, that's Ghana there in the sort of the middle band. And below Ghana, so we've got Costa Rica, the UK, and Peru left.
I think UK must be the last one, surely.
So what do we think for number 4?
I'm going to go for Peru. Sally.
Peru. Okay, that one is Costa Rica. So you're close, Alan, very close. So we've got Costa Rica, and then what about the bottom 2? Which one do we think is number 5? So we've got Peru and UK left.
Peru the next one, and UK the last one.
Do we agree?
The other way round.
You go the other way around, okay?
Yeah.
Any other guesses?
I think the last one's Peru.
Okay, well, the point goes to Susan on this one, Susan Murphy on this one. It is Peru and then the UK.
All right.
So, yeah.
UK.
But just an interesting observation, I think.
Absolutely.
To see it really shows, you see the furthest end of the most recent times, the most recent years, the hotter temperatures being experienced, not in the UK. So although in the UK we feel our weather is changing, we can see the impacts of climate change affecting us. It is very much different to that experienced by those in other regions of the world. And indeed, that's something that those of you who've participated in Fairtrade Fortnight will be very familiar with, and that the messaging they're sharing, as indeed are many who are working on climate change, is the message that those who have contributed least to the impacts of climate change are affected the most. Things like the endangered isle that Fairtrade were featuring during Fairtrade Fortnight around some of the crops and commodities that will no longer be able to be produced because the climates of these regions will no longer be able to sustain production of things like cocoa and coffee beans as well. And certainly here in the UK, we experienced some shortages of salad vegetables not so long ago, that although it wasn't mentioned specifically by supermarkets, is undoubtedly also an impact of the changing climate across Europe as well to supply those. Humanity needs to reach an average carbon footprint of between 1.6 and 2.8 tons of carbon dioxide in the coming decade to limit warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And that's what's been termed as the Paris Climate Agreement. Those are the terms that you will hear around that, and that 1.5 marker that really is considered quite critical for the planet, for humanity to be able to sustain ourselves on this planet. So that's really what carbon footprinting is all about, is using that as a benchmark to support us as individuals, as communities, as governments, as businesses, around what we can all do, steps we can all take to reduce our carbon footprints. So one of the reasons why this is something that I'm interested in and interested in sharing more with you all about is that I recently undertook carbon literacy training. Now, what does it mean to be certified carbon literate, as I'm now proud to say I am? Carbon literacy is an awareness of the carbon dioxide, and when we're referring to carbon dioxide in this sense, we actually mean all greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide is almost used as shorthand for greenhouse gases. It's about an awareness of the costs and impacts of everyday activities, things that we do probably without thinking about them, and the ability and motivation to reduce the emissions from those activities at the individual, community, and organisational basis. So at those different levels, as I mentioned, this is about things we can do as individuals, within our communities, within our organisations, and indeed at government levels too. Understanding what a carbon footprint is, what it is made up of, and which factors are the most significant in terms of contributing to the footprint and therefore reducing it, and how a carbon footprint can be reduced. We can't recycle our way out of this. Planting trees to offset our carbon may help, but it's a sticking plaster, and that may not have an immediate effect. So this is about doing what we can to reduce our carbon. Offsetting is important and can be a useful component of that, but it's really about doing what we can to reduce the carbon in the first place. So as I mentioned, carbon reduction, carbon dioxide is often used to refer to all greenhouse gases, and you maybe see the image on the right, the illustration on the right hand side, CO2e, and that refers to carbon dioxide equivalent. So that is a measure that it takes into account all of the greenhouse gases involved. So very often it's referred to as a carbon footprint, and you might see it with a footprint with the CO2 in it, but when you come to start measuring it or tracking changes that you can make to it, the CO2 equivalent image might be more prevalent. So just to clarify that difference. And really, carbon footprints are about us as humans. As I mentioned, human activity has really caused a significant impact on global temperatures, as we saw from those stripes earlier. You might think, well, what can I as an individual do? What difference do I as an individual make? But actually, it's recognised that individual action can have a 27 to 33% impact on the carbon dioxide equivalent reduction required to help us achieve that 1.5 to 2 degrees change, to minimise that change to that level. So that's a huge percentage, nearly 30%, around 30% of the impact required to reduce that is by us as individuals. So don't ever feel that the difference you make is not worth it, is not going to contribute. Without it, we won't achieve it. So it's absolutely going to contribute. So time for another bit of audience participation. What makes up a carbon footprint? What is a carbon footprint formed of? What activities do you think contribute to your carbon footprint as an individual? Again, feel free just to sort of call out any things that you can think of that you think may contribute to your carbon footprint, and we can start to populate. Susan, yeah.
Driving my old car.
Driving your car, okay. Yeah.
An old one, particularly.
An old one, okay. Yes, absolutely. No problem.
Burning anything.
Burning anything? Yeah. Okay.
Private jets, Sally.
Private jets, yeah, all of those that we all have sitting in our.
I forgot last week. Yeah.
Yeah.
Using the right refrigerators or freezers at home.
Yeah, absolutely. So things like refrigerators or other electrical appliances. Yeah,
Right.
no, absolutely. Yeah.
Bad choices when buying out of season fruit, vegetables and things.
Yeah, absolutely. The food that we eat and when we choose to eat that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but diet, you know,
Yeah.
eating less meat.
yeah, absolutely. Okay. Any others?
I think burning in our parts in Africa, mostly burning of
Greenhouse.
green
Yeah.
bushes and clearing. So
Yes.
the limit of that within the community is also very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Burning and the emissions that brings with it. Absolutely. Okay. So yeah, all great answers. So here's a quick summary of what you've all mentioned. A couple of things perhaps that haven't been, but yeah, transport, cars, private jets, whatever they might be, they all contribute, absolutely. Some obviously to a greater extent than others, and we'll have a little explore of a way that you can understand more about the different types of transport in a moment. Food, what we eat, what we choose to eat, when we choose to eat it, absolutely all has a factor to play. I've got what I think is an interesting graph to show you shortly to illustrate one of the choices that I've chosen to make following my carbon literacy training, that I think highlights the food sector quite interestingly. Electricity, provision of services to property, so where we live, things like heating, water, air conditioning, appliances, as was mentioned, refrigeration, those sorts of things, what we use in our homes. So not just the electricity and how that is produced and how we use it, but also what we are using that for can also have an impact. Clothes, the clothes we wear, how they are produced. There are emissions involved in the production of clothing. And indeed things like toiletries, all sorts of things that we purchase and make use of, all have emissions, create emissions. We're probably more familiar in terms of toiletries and things talking about plastic reduction, but also it's about considering the emissions that are produced through the production of those products. The services we use, various things that we are, anything that we buy, basically, anything that we're purchasing or using will have an emission somewhere. I mentioned an interesting graph. Well, I think it's interesting. So when I did my carbon literacy training, I had to make two commitments to achieve the certification. One was to make an individual commitment, and the second was to make a community level commitment. So this, you'll be pleased to hear, is my community level commitment. My commitment was to deliver a presentation around carbon footprint to colleagues and volunteers. So welcome, thank you for enabling me to fulfill that element of my training. And my individual commitment was to go vegan 1 week a month. So to make that commitment to change my diet. To do that. This is actually one of my vegan weeks this week. So I am enjoying sampling a whole variety of vegan delights and trying new recipes and things. But this I came across recently and I thought this is really quite interesting because when we talk about diets, we're maybe talking about, it was mentioned about reduction of meat and how the contribution that can have. But I just thought this was quite interesting as well to help us consider the impact of milk. And so you can see there the emissions, the pinkish on the left-hand side of each shows the emissions per litre of milk and how high that is for cow's milk compared to any of the other plant-based milks, but also the difference between those plant-based milks as well. Obviously included in there is land use, which is another factor, as was mentioned, about the burning of certain things that can create emissions and the challenges that brings. So it's not an easy picture and it's not always a simple answer to make one switch. There are always different things to consider, but I think this hopefully gives a bit of perspective perhaps to the impacts that different types of food can have from an emissions perspective. So a little bit of another audience participation piece here for you. So we have the average carbon footprint per person. So these are individual carbon footprints for individuals. at the global level, and then again, taking those 5 countries, we're going to have a little look at what are the average carbon footprints per individual in those countries. So I'm going to give you a helping hand to start with. So the global average carbon footprint for an individual is 4.79. So that's 4.79 tons of carbon emitted by every person on the planet on an annual basis, taken as an average. So you will expect some countries will have a higher carbon footprint than that, and some countries will have a lower carbon footprint than that. So this is a game of higher or lower. So for Costa Rica, do you think the global average carbon footprint per person in Costa Rica is higher or lower than the global?
It's definitely lower.
Lower?
Yeah.
Lower.
Okay, let's see. Yep, you're correct. Lower, 1.7 tons of carbon dioxide per person. What about Ghana? Do we think Ghana is higher or lower than Costa Rica?
I think it's a bit low.
Lower.
Lower?
Yeah.
I think it's a bit higher than Costa Rica.
Okay.
Oh.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. So Ghana's doing pretty well right now. Yeah, absolutely. Particularly when we look at this in the global average as well. I think it's interesting to bear that in mind as perspective for this as well. So let's look at Kenya. Do you think Kenya is higher or lower than Ghana?
A little higher.
Yeah, then,
Higher.
Higher, yeah.
It's definitely below the global average.
Wow.
It's lower.
Wow.
it's even lower.
Wow.
Yeah. And then Peru, do you think Peru is higher or lower than Kenya?
About the same.
Yeah, it might be higher.
I think higher than Ghana.
Okay, higher than Ghana even. Okay, let's have a look. Yeah,
Really?
quite high up there. And then the UK, where do we
Oh,
think the
dread
UK
to
fits
think.
in all of this?
Way above
Yeah, well,
global.
Peru.
No.
Let's have a look. We are indeed, absolutely. Well done, Susan.
yeah.
Even above the global. Yeah. So yeah, we're at 5.55. So bearing in mind that these are averages, obviously within each of these countries, there will be individuals who have carbon footprints higher than these, as well as individuals who have carbon footprints lower than these. And in the global scale, actually, the UK is not the highest. There'll be other countries that I'm sure you wouldn't be surprised to hear are higher than that. The US, for example, China, other countries that will have much higher global footprints. So these are all averages of these regions. I've included the web link there of where that data came from in case you're interested in having a little look around that. And I'll share all of these links following as well. Because if any of you are interested in this sort of data, there's some fascinating information out there, and it's really, really interesting to look at.
Wow.
So how do we look at our own carbon footprints? So this is another little bit of audience participation. You're very welcome to have a go at this now. We will have a little chat about it, or equally, if you want to save this to take away for another point. I'm just going to, what I'll do is if I can find the chat, which I can, I will just share this in the chat so you can click onto this website now. And so what you can do, so Geeky is a great tool that gives you the opportunity to work out your own carbon footprint. And also it helpfully gives you suggestions of steps that you can take to reduce your carbon footprint. So since doing my carbon literacy training a couple of months ago, I signed up to this while I was doing the training, and I've taken various steps to try and reduce my own carbon footprint. And they're really doable steps. There are things like, some of the steps I've done is to commit to only using the eco setting on my washing machine, to only use plastic-free wipes, something that I was doing previously, but is something that can contribute to reducing my personal carbon footprint. So you can have a look at that website. You can register. You then just sign up with an email and create a password, and then you have your own Geeky account that you will then receive occasional emails with suggestions of steps that you can take to reduce your carbon footprint. And it gives you put in some basic data about your your current situation, so things that you currently do, so that it can give you a sort of a baseline, if you like. It needs to start from somewhere. With all of these, it's about having some starting information to then make progress against. So feel free to have a play with that. If any of you want to share with us what your carbon footprints are at the end of the call, feel free to do so. You can share those in the chat with us. But I just thought you might be interested to have a look at what it can do, what it looks like. So this was my carbon footprint a couple of months ago when I set this up. So you can see 7,684 kilograms of carbon emissions. The majority of that for me comes from transport. We do drive a diesel car. It is not new to us. So we went down the second-hand route, which maybe takes some of the emissions off, but ultimately when we use it, it is burning diesel. The Geeky also gives you an end-of-year target. So it gives you a sort of hopefully manageable goal to reach. And through taking steps that they suggest to you, you can reduce your carbon footprint for the year. So my target for the end of the year is just over 7,000 kilograms of carbon emissions, and each of the steps that I take will have a certain number, a certain value of carbon emissions that it's helping me reduce. So the idea being that at the end of the year, all of the steps that I've taken throughout that year will hopefully reduce my carbon footprint sufficiently. It does try to do that in a manageable way. This isn't about saying go from 7,600 to 0 overnight. This is about doing things in a manageable, bite-sized way. It's very reasonable in its approach, I feel. And then it also gives me my 2030 target. So my 2030 target is to have a carbon footprint of 2,500 kilograms, which at the moment, to be honest, feels a long way off, but it's something to work for. And I think that's what's important with this, is having an end goal, having a value in sight that you can focus on, that you can see these little steps are all contributing. It's like I was saying about us as individuals, it's about doing something, and it's about starting to do something towards it, which is important. It's not just about footprints, though. It's not just about reducing what we emit. There are other ways that we can do something, that we can make a difference. And that's where the concept of the climate shadow comes in. So this is more about what we leave, what we create, rather than what we emit. So it's about things that we can do. So it's about whether we talk to people about climate change, whether we do something, whether we contact our local parliamentarians to take action on something. It's about how we engage with people around us on these issues. So it's about the sort of the legacy, if you like, that we can create by talking to others about climate change and engaging them in taking actions for themselves as well, and collectively. Perhaps in your local community, there are various initiatives around different climate change adaptations or different sort of activities that communities can engage with to really spread the word about this. So the climate shadow is this concept that the impact we have is not just about the emissions we are creating, it's also about the wider impact we have by talking about it and trying to communicate about it, trying to do something about what we're experiencing. And I think one of the sort of particularly prevalent ways that we're starting to see that happen in the UK in terms of how people are talking about climate is starting to change. We're now starting to see conversations about climate change, not just about carbon emissions. This is increasingly about the intersection of climate and nature, because alongside the change in climate, we have also seen a change in biodiversity. So biodiversity loss, or the loss of biodiversity, is the decline or disappearance of biological diversity, understood as the variety of living things that inhabit the planet. It's different levels of biological organization and their respective genetic variability, as well as the natural patterns present in ecosystems. So the more diverse our kind of environmental context, the better it is for that context. So the more variety in something, the more likely things are to be able to grow healthily and to be able to sustain themselves. So similar to the climate stripes that we looked at earlier, this chart shows the global biodiversity, which the greener, the darker green, the better the biodiversity. The grey, the worse the biodiversity. And you can see the trend that this chart is showing that we're directed in. Absolutely, thumbs down on that one. The biodiversity stripes, as these are known, so we've got the climate stripes and the biodiversity stripes, are created by the same person, and they were created by an individual at one of the universities in the UK in England. And the global biodiversity, you'll see there, tracks from 1970, so it doesn't go as far back as the climate stripes, but shows that similar linear transition, which I think creates quite a nice visual to be able to understand what we're talking about. Sometimes these things can be quite difficult to access, but I certainly find this visual quite interesting to see what's happening. So when we're talking about actions that we can take, actions around biodiversity can also be considered actions towards mitigating and supporting the reduction in carbon emissions and supporting mitigation and climate change. So some of the things that you may be familiar with, No Mow May, some of you may have participated in that. So that's a UK initiative where people were encouraged not to cut their grass in the whole month of May. To really encourage biodiversity. So this was about encouraging wildlife, butterflies, insects to our gardens to enjoy the foods, if you like, from these early crops that would grow in our grasses. It's something that I think has sort of grown in popularity over time as people appreciate that it's something hopefully quite easy to do, but is not it can have a significant impact. Whether people choose to not cut any of their grass or just part of it, is some people make nice patterns in their grass because they don't want to just have it all wild. They want to have some order, perhaps. So it's about finding what works for you, and I think that's what's important with all of this, is finding the changes that you can make and that are manageable for you as individuals. Another factor that can increase biodiversity, these are hedgehog holes. So this is not something to be taken lightly. Do discuss with your neighbours if you're going to make a hole in your fence, because it's obviously their fence too. And this is really about encouraging hedgehogs to be able to pass through different gardens. Our gardens, as we tend to sort of create them, can be quite restrictive for wildlife. So this is about factoring in their needs as well as our own into that. Bug hotels, something that are really popular amongst kids, amongst young people, and are really quite easy to create your own, and really just offering a welcome place for all sorts of bugs to come, whether that be bees, spiders, ants, whatever it might be, things that you want to encourage into a space that they can call their own. So this is just an example, not one that I created, but an example of a bug hotel, to give you a sense of what that is all about. Wildflower seeds. Hopefully many of you will have received your gift from us this Volunteers Week, which was a little box of seed balls and wildflower seeds, and planting, whether that be wildflower seeds, trees, whatever it might be, that all helps to encourage biodiversity in our environments. Litter picking, another important part and relatively straightforward activity to be able to do, important to help keep wildlife healthy, to be able to keep those spaces safe for wildlife. So really, I suppose just a reminder to conclude on that climate change does refer to the long-term shifts and global or regional climate patterns caused by us as human beings and our activities, leading to rising temperatures, extreme weather events, and that loss in biodiversity. But we can and are making steps forward. We are achieving this, and all of our actions contribute to the large-scale change that is needed. And these are just some of the recent headlines around this that I wanted to share with you, because they may have passed you by. So the ozone layer, which many of you will remember was a big thing in the 90s, that we were trying to reduce our use of CFCs. The ozone layer is recovering. The changes that we made as human beings to respond to that challenge have been successful. We have a precedent here. We can make a difference. Deforestation in the Amazon is down 40% so far this year. When we were talking earlier about burning being a big contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, this is a huge achievement in being able to really change the practices that we carry out. This decade, 2021 to 2030, has been declared the ecosystem restoration decade by the UN. Again, something that's a fantastic achievement and something to be proud of, and gives us again more context to do more about this, talk more about it, have these conversations with people. Did you know? I didn't know until I was looking into some examples for this, that it is the decade on ecosystem restoration. And then lastly there, I thought this was particularly inspiring, if I'm honest. So the image there you will see represents the signing and conclusion of the Oceans Treaty in March 2023. And this is at the UN, and the individual was given a standing ovation for concluding this treaty, which was signed and brings the entire world together on this. Worth a Google if you're not familiar with it, because I won't do it justice at the moment, but absolutely worth checking out. And this was a huge success. You can see there her emotion at being able to make this achievement. And so I think really it's just hopefully about leaving us with the feeling that hope is good, but action is better. So I hope that as a result of this, whatever action you choose to take, it's something, and something in the right direction. So I do have some time for questions if anybody would like to. I do have a wealth more of information and resources I can connect anybody to if they're interested. But hopefully that's been a little snapshot of carbon footprinting and some things that you can take away and do yourselves. So I'm going to just stop sharing my screen now so that I can see if there are any questions at all. Susan, yeah.
I'm interested to know how you did this course, or how it was done, and found that very inspiring. A whole lot of things that I thought I was quite bright, but I haven't registered so many of them, and I found that really an interesting challenge. I wondered why I'd signed up for this, and then I found it really helpful. Thank you.
Good. Oh no, you're welcome. I'm glad, and I think that's the thing with all of this, is there is always so much to learn, and I think it's about being inspired by what interests us. Within all of this, there are going to be things that we each as individuals pick up on more than other things. We maybe think, oh, for me, the choice I made about making that one week a month going vegan, that was something because I love cooking, I love exploring different foods. So for me, food was a key motivator in that. Other things I'm interested in, but for me, food was a very interesting one. How I did the course, so it is, there is an organisation called the Carbon Literacy Project, and they sort of have this model, if you like, of carbon literacy training. There are a number of trainers internationally, a lot of them based in the UK. I think the UK is sort of that's where they are based as an entity, but individuals anywhere in the world can participate in training. I did it online with a sort of certified trainer through a group called Sustainable-ish. Is the name of the lady. You may be familiar with her, Jen.
Got her book.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So she's quite well known in the UK in the sort of sustainability sector. And so she was someone that I had been following and was aware of. So I chose to do her course. It was 2 hours for 4 days over the period of a month. So 2 hours a week over the period of a month. The training itself is 8 hours long. Yeah, perfect, excellent. Yeah. So this is, and I think what I found about her course was I like the ish element to what she's doing. This isn't about being perfect. This isn't about doing everything at once. This is about doing small things that make a big impact. So collectively, those little actions are going to do something. And I really liked what her approach to it, about saying, yes, this is the challenge, this is what we have to deal with, shown through those climate stripes, for example. This is the situation we're in, but let's not get distracted by the challenges. Let's get doing and taking steps.
So I think the most difficult thing to do with climate change and loss of biodiversity is actually engaging people.
Yes.
Because I've been involved in a planning application in our village, which we have a great deal of worry about, because we would like it to be a sustainable addition to our village and not, another sort of a set of houses spewing out carbon dioxide. But it was a bit of a travesty, the planning meeting, because neither the planning officer nor the councillors who were on the planning committee seemed to have any idea about the council's carbon strategy, the climate strategy, which they paid a lot of money to some organisation to do for them. And they also have a strategy on a green and blue infrastructure strategy. Again, there didn't seem to be any knowledge of this on the planning committee. So, and another thing that really worries us is the drainage and sewage, because 30 years ago, when my house was built, I was refused permission to go onto the main drainage because they said that the capacity of the sewage works wasn't big enough. And so I have a septic tank, which is fine, works fine. But now, 30 years later, they're saying they can have 31 houses and a doctor's surgery. And there's been no increase in size of the sewage works. And so I had a look at a very interesting map produced by River Action and you can look up how much sewage overflow there's been at your local sewage works in 2022 and previous years, I think. So I looked up for Hindon, where I live, and discovered there have been 46 spills in 2022. So I thought, well, how is this sewage works going to be adequate for another 31 houses?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's very difficult to sort of anyway, this is a big thing in the village now. It's really galvanized people into action.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I think it is about what is it at how are individuals that you want to engage with, how are they seeing this? Is it something that's on people's radar? And I think that was very much what the carbon literacy training is about. Is the biggest challenge for climate change is for us to talk about it. And I think that is how we do that. We will all have our own ways and our own approaches, but it's about understanding how is our audience engaged with this? Are they engaged with it? Where do we start that conversation? And I think that can be a real challenge. But as you say, if there is something that you can sort of rally around, that can be helpful, because everybody has a common. It's that as I started, it's about what will motivate you. It might be something to you personally. It might be a place. It might be a person. It might be a thing. And for you, it sounds like that's very much a place. And that is something that your community can sort of develop around. And I think that's really helpful in many ways, because you have a number of voices, probably with different experiences and perspectives, that are hopefully able to come together to move forward on that and engage with the council, the planners, all of these people who have the sort of the decision-making power, if you like. Because if we don't tell people we care and it matters to us, they don't know. If we don't have these conversations, they might not realise that it's something that's important. So it's taking those steps, isn't it?
I'm about to write an article for the local newsletter entitled Poo Corner, with apologies to A. Mill.
Excellent. Oh, that's and a bit of humour in there as well never goes amiss, I think. Sometimes making it a bit entertaining for people. And Vivian, you've got your hand raised. Have you got a question? Oh, sorry, Vivian, you're muted. Let me see if I can unmute you.
So, okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, excellent. We've got you. Thank you.
I simply wanted to say this has been very helpful, but in talking to people, I think it's really important to encourage the small steps we've all taken. For instance, I did No Mow May. Well, actually, I'm doing No Mow June now. But it's that we've all, or most people, I think, whether they take an active interest or not, have heard the downsides, the fears, the sense that we're all doing something wrong. I mean, we people who live in a rich country, and I'm only saying emphasize the positive.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Vivian. And I agree. I absolutely agree. I think it is. for me personally, it's more inspiring to hear the positive to motivate me to say this can be done, and what I'm doing or trying to do can and is making a difference. And I think that's for me, that's the approach to take. As I say, if you need a bit of the sort of the doom side of things or the negative side of things, then yeah, that whatever works for you, there's plenty of that around. But yeah, I think it's focusing on what can be done is really key. Excellent.
I just wonder if anybody else has got a positive that has encouraged them, because I do find it difficult to see positives. And one of my big stumbling blocks at the moment is trying to get people to even dare to think about recycling, because that is just such a complex minefield. But I want to move beyond that, because that's just become so negative. Is there anybody else that would like to share a positive?
Yeah, has anybody got a positive experience from their community of something that is happening or is working?
Well, I just wanted to say, you were talking about bug hotels. Well, for several years now, I've been doing citizen science projects with the Buzz Club at Sussex University, which was set up by Professor Dave Gorson. And well, for the last 2 years, I've been doing a project called Here We Go. And I've engaged my neighbour's son, who's not the brightest cookie around, but he's a lovely child, and he comes and helps me. Well, we made the earwig hotels yesterday, and but earwigs actually are a very neglected insect. They eat aphids. We proved that last year, so they're very useful in your garden. They might have a little nibble at your dahlia petals, but other than that, they're quite harmless. And they really take care of their young, unlike many other insects. And they all possibly are really quite good pollinators as well. So they're to be
Encouraged,
looked after and encouraged.
yeah.
And, but no, it was really last year. It was very dry, and earwigs don't like dry and hot. And the year before it was quite wet, and we got rather a lot of wood lice, as earwigs don't like very wet either. But it was, but they have all sorts of projects. It's the Buzz Club at Sussex University, and you know, there are all sorts of charming little projects that you can do, which quite appeal to children maybe, and it's so you know, I think that's quite a good way of engaging people, you know, to preserve, not to sculpt their lawn, and you know, I have quite a lot of wildness in my garden, but
Excellent. I'm sure the biodiversity appreciates it, Susan.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. Well, that feels like a positive story, hopefully, for you, Susan, to finish on. So thank you all for joining. If you do have any further questions, want to know anything more about the training course or anything from what we've covered, do let me know. If you would like to share your geeky score, then do get in touch, or obviously feel free to keep that for yourself if you'd prefer. But do check it out. I think it's a great way of helping us to make those little actions, and I find it helpful because it prompts me. I think we lead such busy lives, it can be easy to get distracted and forget these things. But every so often, every couple of weeks, I just get an email reminder saying, have you tried this? Try this next step, do something different. So yeah, I'd encourage you to give it a go. And yeah, look forward to hearing any questions that you might have. Just drop me an email. Yeah, thank you for joining this morning. We do have our final session for the Volunteer Festival this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Where we'll be joined by Harriet and Kodjo from Shared Interest Foundation, who'll be talking about one of their recent projects. So hopefully we'll see some of you there, but thanks for joining.
Thank you very much. Brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nice to see everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, thank you.